for enough years, you will eventually get hit with a malpractice suit. The odds are not high that you will get hit with a Department of Health or OPMC investigation. However, it happens. There are thousands of investigations from the Department of Medical Conduct every year, Professional Medical Conduct every year, most of which, thankfully, you never hear about because on first blush, there's just nothing there. They have no authority over you concerning what you charge a patient, if the patient was kept waiting too long in the waiting room, things like that. And many of the complaints that they get are frankly just from angry patients, patients' families, things of that nature. There's just no substance. It goes away. You never even hear about it. It doesn't always happen, and that's what keeps me personally and other healthcare lawyers busy, for better or for worse. As far as for malpractice insurance, is malpractice insurance required as a matter of law in New York State? Anybody? It is? Oh, I said it's a matter of law in New York State. At hospitals require it, of course. Virtually all surgery centers require it, of course. But if you're a physician practicing in New York State, there's no regulation that requires you to have malpractice insurance. Now, I think you'd have to be out of your mind not to have malpractice insurance. I'm certainly not going to advocate that. What can I tell you? We actually have physicians that go there, in plain this terminology used, and we do defend them. And frankly, they're less appetizing to most attorneys because there's no deep pocket. But you better have either a very solid marriage or have your assets buried in Mars if that's the way you want to go. I certainly would not recommend it. I don't know too many lawyers that would. So it's not the way to go. But it's not required in New York State. It is required in other states, but every state is different, and that's the way our system works. There are 50 states, there are 50 versions of the law. It's pretty obvious for anyone who has ever paid the premium, one of your biggest expenses in practice is paying that premium, especially if you're in OBGYN, neurosurgery, orthopedic surgery. When I was in practice in the 80s, for foot and ankle surgery, I was paying $25,000 for bone coverage. So it hasn't gone down since then, I could assure you. OBGYNs are paying close to $200,000 now for coverage. It's totally insane, but it's the reality. And it has to be reflected upon it with our fees, because although sometimes others would like to do otherwise, we still have to turn a profit at the end of the day to pay our bills, feed our families. So you have to factor that into what you're going to be charging and what you could expect from companies, what they're willing to pay. Stop at any other questions, by the way, because it's a small enough group. You may have problems getting coverage if you have red flags. What are red flags? Everybody know here what the National Practice Data Bank is? Remember when you were little, your parents told you, or your teacher told you, if you're bad, it's going to go on your permanent record? That's your permanent record for doctors. It started off years back where almost no one was going to be able to see it. And as predicted by the AMA and other organizations, a lot of people at this stage can see it. The insurance companies, the hospitals, the underwriters of various insurance companies, they see it. It's out there. The average patient can't see it. They can go to something called the New York State Physician's Profile and frankly see a lot about your business. But they can't see what's on the data bank. But the problem is, anything against you, for example, if you lost your privileges in a hospital, notice I didn't say you didn't renew, but if you've lost your privileges in the hospital, if you were bounced out of an insurance company participatory agreement, again, notice I didn't say we're not renewed, but if you were bounced out of an agreement, generally would cause that goes in the data bank. All right? Malpractice suit settlements. Not malpractice suits. Anyone can sue anyone for anything in this country, and especially in New York State. But settlements, they go on the data bank. So when you apply to an insurance company for coverage, they're going to know about that. Don't even try to hide it. They know about it. And it's a big watcher. When you're filling out applications for privileges at hospitals, surgery centers, or whatever, don't try to hide your sordid past. They know about it. And like the old Watergate situation, it's the cover-up that gets you every time, not even so much the original problem. We have more problems defending doctors' licenses or trying to get the malpractice coverage because they conveniently left something out of their history in their application. They checked the wrong box, yes or no. Don't do that. And if you're not sure, call your friendly healthcare attorney. I didn't say real estate attorney, although they're very fine attorneys. I didn't say divorce attorney, but healthcare attorneys, that's what they do for a living. Yes, sir?
Question, we get applicants who fill out on their applications and they would list settlements. However, cases where they were named, they would not put that on. And on our query, we get that they had number of cases in which they were named,
but no, there was no payout.
They may have been dropped. Now, what is our obligation to ask for clarification of those cases before we credential individuals?
I would argue that it's an improper question for a hospital to ask, please list all the times you were sued, as opposed to all the times that there was a payout. In the same way that I would argue, and virtually every state, they ask, have you ever been convicted of a misdemeanor or a felony? Not have you ever been charged with a misdemeanor or a felony. Because the way our system works, you're presumed innocent until you're found guilty, and hopefully you're presumed not liable till either you agree to some kind of settlement or a jury finds that there's some kind of settlement. So the fact that you were named in the case, you know what, I can tell you what happens. I'm a defense lawyer, so we defend doctors. We only defend doctors, period, end of sentence. But my colleagues, my legal colleagues, my medical colleagues on the other side of the aisle, the plaintiffs people, bad guys, they will often sue everybody that looked at or touched the patient to get them to come to a deposition or to make sure they haven't left the deep pocket alone. So it's not unusual that especially hospital-based physicians are named in lawsuits. Well, in the treatment of a patient, even if there's some merit to the suit, you'll see 10, 15, 20 names on the suit, and 10 of them are dropped.
I don't want you to finish.
Physicians obviously don't. I didn't enjoy that either, actually, in practice, but it's a reality of life. Again, I would argue that I don't think you're under any obligation to pursue the amount of times they were sued. I would argue that to do your diligence on a prospective staff member that or someone's applying for privileges, that you should find out what that $500,000 payout was all about.
Right. The other side that the hospital governing boards look at, if within 3 years you were named in 11 lawsuits, you know, they consider it a red flag.
If you were named in 11 lawsuits in 3 years, probably some of those 11 is going to be a payout. That would be highly unusual if you were named 11 times and there was never a payout.
If you're in a big group and the whole bundle is being sued, you know, it's possible.
It's possible, and it may put that person at increased risk, but I would assume you would know that that person is in a big group. Also, what you could do to get around that is you could simply ask, can any of you go on the New York State Physicians Profile? That's a website open to the public. You don't have to know anybody. Type in every single doctor's name in that big group and see their payout history on their claims. That's there, including yours, if it's kept up to date. And by the way, it has to be kept up to date. It has to be kept up to date, or right now the Department of Health is actually sanctioning physicians for not keeping their New York State Physicians Profile up to date. 90% of the doctors in this state don't even know what a physician's profile is. So what I'm going to tell you to do is to Google or Bing or whatever you use, Explorer, go on the web, type in NYS Physician's Profile or Physician Profile. It'll get you there. There'll be a query box, physician's name. Click on it, put your name in it. See the last time your physician's profile was updated. Now here's the kicker. Every time you renew your registration, you don't want, if I don't go by my slides, slide by slide, it's boring stuff anyway. But every time you renew your registration, you are taking an oath that what's in that website is up to date. Now, it may be something as innocuous as your office address changed, or you no longer accept United Healthcare. But what's in that site, you have an obligation. You swore that it's accurate. So take a look at it, and you can update it. You can update it online. You can update it with a fax. But when you do update it, keep copies of what you did. And if you're doing it via mail, keep a certified return receipt. Keep that green card. And if you're doing it via fax, keep like a fax receipt. And if you're doing it online, print out whatever you have to print out to prove that you made those changes. And then go online a week or 2 or 3 later to make sure that that site has taken the changes. It's an easy way to avoid something that has become or starting to become problematic. They started fining, and now they actually put a doctor or 2 on probation for that. So keep up to date on that. So, but that's an easy way to keep up, if I could come back to your point, doctor, that if you want to find out, do the other physicians in the group, do they get hit with a lot of suits if there was a payout, that's the way to do it. You could do your due diligence and not really, at least as far as my opinion, is to violate privacy in the sense that a doctor gets sued but wasn't really liable for anything. All right.
Documenting stuff.
Every one of you have heard of the McDonald's suit, and every one of you have heard of some doctor somewhere that got sued for billions, zillions, and billions, and trillions, whatever first consonant you want to put on the illions. Here's the truth. If you're a plaintiff's attorney, which I'm not, all right, if you're a plaintiff's attorney, and you have to live in agency fee, which means you get a percentage. You only get that percentage if you go to the pay window in plain English. If you have bad malpractice time after time after time, you're going out of, you're not going to the pay window, you're going out of business. You're going to the bankruptcy window. So a plaintiff's malpractice attorney with half a brain is not taking garbage suits. They'd be foolish from a financial point of view. Most lawyers have no hatred against doctors per se. They want to make a living. The plaintiff's attorneys want to make a living too. Now, sometimes they want to make a living in, frankly, very not nice ways, and they're very happy to run right over your body. But they'll only want to run over your body if they're going to make a couple of bucks to do it. And the malpractice companies are not that quick. They're not paying out $2.5 million. Well, that's FSLA case. They're not paying out $2.387 million because you left an ingrown toenail with somebody and they had an extra pain for 3 days. They're just not doing it. Just not doing it. So there has to be something really there, or at least that they think a jury is going to perceive is really there. All right. So malpractice does occur. That's not to say any one of you are going to commit malpractice. It doesn't mean that you intentionally trying to hurt anybody. It's not what we call an intentional tort. Negligence doesn't mean you were trying to hurt somebody. Negligence could simply mean you forgot it. You didn't consider it when you might have, or you didn't get a consultation when you should have, or you didn't, more than likely than not, you kept a chart. I came on the tail end of your lecture, but it's perfect. You kept a chart that was not accurate, was not complete, which, by the way, you have to do if you're looking to get to have less problems with Office of Professional Medical Conduct and malpractice. If you keep a good, complete chart, that's your best defense. That's Exhibit A, B, and C. Examples. Take whatever blood value you like. Was within normal limits. It was in normal limits. And you leave it at that. But it was trending up. Someone's PSA well, there's no normal number for PSA, but the PSA was 4, which is not alarmingly high. But 12 months before was 2. There's a trend that it doubled. That should be not ignored, that should be noted somewhere in your records. And if, like you said, you cut and paste a normal exam from a year ago to save yourself a little time, now that we have the blessings of electronic medical records, which is full of its own problems, cut and paste being probably number one. So we, as lawyers, or the OPMC, or the malpractice, the bad guys, or an insurance audit, goes across the board with this stuff. They see that your exam is hunky-dory. Well, and what were you doing treating this patient for A, B, C, D, and E? It makes no sense, exactly what you said. You're sending in an insurance form into an insurance company for treatment of something, whether it's for another 3 weeks or 2 weeks ICD-9, or welcome to the brave new world on October 1st, ICD-10, you're saying there's some kind of reimbursable diagnosis. You can't say, nor should it really be, that everything is normal. You know, if you say the patient does or doesn't smoke, and they quit, if they were smoking and they quit smoking, the chart should reflect that. The chart should reflect how long they quit smoking. You're giving the patient a prescription for something. How much how long, when is it supposed to take it. That should be in your records. How is the patient responding to your treatment plan? Doing well is not really enough. Not really enough. If you're treating a patient for vascular insufficiency and there was, before the treatment commenced, 1 block claudication. So, you know, it'd be nice to say on treatment plan A, after 3 weeks, the patient now has 1.5 or 2 block claudication. Patient is, whatever their exercise routine is, walking for how many blocks until they feel claudication. I just picked something out of the hat. You name your diagnosis and treatment. I don't see that. Most of my colleagues, the OPMC, doesn't see that in enough medical records. So here's this is not a medical record lecture per se, but here's the takeaway on medical records. Medical records should always, sorry?
No, it's,
go ahead. Medical records should always say why you did, what you did, when you did it. But they should also say what you didn't do, what you didn't do, when you didn't do it. And I'll give you an example of that too. Patient, you do a culture and sensitivity, there's an abscess. Doesn't matter where in the body as far as I'm concerned. You do a culture and sensitivity. It comes back positive for, let's just say, I don't know, cephalosporins is a general category. Now, at least in my day, they used to consider about a 30% cross reactivity with cephalosporins and a penicillin allergy. It may be a little different today, or maybe a little dated, I apologize. But again, name your medication. So you don't give the cephalosporin because the patient has a penicillin allergy. Instead, you give Levaquin, which was next in the sensitivity panoply, the pantheon of what comes back. You should say in your chart why you're giving the Levaquin, not the cephalosporin, the Keflex, even though the Keflex has a better kill ratio when you culture sensitivity. Explain your rationale why you gave the, quote, second best in that particular patient. If your chart has that level of detail, you'll be fine in medical audits. You'll be a lot healthier to survive and not get these kind of verdicts. And you'll have a lot less problems with the Department of Health. There's very few things I can promise you or guarantee you, and any more than you can guarantee me that you're going to cure me. But I guarantee you that's so. If your records are that quality, you're going to have a lot less problems. Unless you're just out and out committing fraud with your records and just making it up as you go along, and no one is ever going to suggest that, I can assure you. Any questions on that point? Okay. Why do you get sued? What's the #1 reason doctors get sued?
too many lawyers.
I would agree with that. Shakespeare was right. First thing we do is kill all the lawyers. Most of my friends are not lawyers, they're physicians. My own son is a physician right in the area here. He's at the competition right down the road. 2 of my grandchildren were born in this hospital. So, you know which camp I'm in. You're right, there are too many lawyers. And too many lawyers have to look to make a living. But that's not the #1 reason, because even with too many lawyers, they still have to pick cases that they have a shot of going to the pay window. What's the biggest reason why a patient wants to sue a doctor?
They think that something bad happened to them.
Okay.
Lack of communication.
That's good too. Those two kind of go together though, because if the doctor had better communication, they might not think something untoward happened to them. Also, sometimes when the patient goes to another doctor, the other doctor, I mean, I'm sorry, it's not unheard of, might be a little arrogant, and spew forth a little verbal diarrhea saying that the other guy screwed up, the other person, I should say, screwed up, and I know better. Or at least that's the signals they send out. If I had been your doctor at the time of X, that wouldn't have happened. That happens more often than you think. And doctors are hurting themselves when they do that. And don't pat yourself on the back when you get the other person's patient, because they don't see your successes. The other doctor sees your failures, and you see the other doctor's failures, not successes. That goes 2 ways, all right? So when I was in practice, I saw the other guy's failed bunionectomies, and the other guy or the other lady saw my failed bunionectomies. So check your ego at the door, and pass it forward so that you don't give the lawyers clients because of verbal diarrhea. But that, to me, is still not the #1 cause of lawsuits. The #1 cause of lawsuits, plain and simple, is ticked off, or you, whatever definition, whatever you call it, whatever you want, ticked off patients. They're ticked off that they waited too long. They're ticked off that they didn't get their calls returned. It's the exact same reasons why people are ticked off at attorneys. They don't think they get their calls returned quickly enough. They don't think they get enough time. It's another thing. And they don't think that, in general, they don't think they get the fair shake. They don't feel that the doctor makes them feel important. If you make your patient feel important, 2 minutes of eye-to-eye contact is an awfully long time. It feels like 22. I'm not going to go into specifics, but I recently had a little bout with her. I had to be with a doctor, and it involved some minor surgical work. And the doctor wasn't with me for an awful. I purposely took a look at my watch, exactly how long he was with me. And it was, they used to say, a big guy from one of the hospitals in Manhattan. And he was maybe with me prior to for 2-3 minutes, but it seemed like an awfully long time because while he was with me, he wasn't looking at his cell phone text messaging, and he wasn't looking at the stock prices, and he wasn't taking 5 messages from his MAs or nurses. He was with me for those 2 or 3 minutes. And you know what? I mean, thank God I'm here. Everything came out fine. But I felt he gave me 100% of what he had to give me. That's all the patient has a right to ask of you. So as far as I'm concerned, that's the #1 reason that starts lawsuits. Patients don't like it. If a patient likes you, thinks you gave them a fair shake, made them feel important, yeah, of course you can still get sued, but it's much, much more unlikely. Much, much more unlikely. They're not going to go to the lawyer in the first place. They don't want to. They like you. Second guessed by the subsequent doctor, or nurse. Which brings me to another point, which is not really in the slides, but that's okay. One of the biggest source of our clients, and I'm looking to get rid of these clients, they're the worst clients, it's the doctor that doesn't play well in the sandbox with others. So it's the doctor. It could be, by the way, it could be the nurse, it could be the doctor, it could be ancillary medical personnel, but I'm here today. By and large and invariably, this sets up others that want to throw them under the bus, and are all too happy to when the occasion arises. And it happens a lot in hospitals in New York State, which is my bailiwick, all over the state, from Buffalo to Montauk. I'm not taking on them in the Hudson Valley, I can assure you. But what happens is they get a new EMR system, and initially there's some blowback and resistance. But it doesn't end at constructive criticism. It goes on, it goes on, it goes on, and there's sniping, and it's behind the back, and did you know this, and phone calls, and votes at committee meetings, and also, you have to know when to give up the ghost. Express your opinion like a professional, like you all are. If you lose, life goes on. Learn to deal with it, or find another hospital, if that's the case. But if you play poorly in the sandbox with others, I'm not here to tell you that people are vindictive, but I am here to tell you that if you play nicely in the sandbox with others, the others are more likely to play nicely with you. And what happens is, if time after time you are short and curt and unprofessional with the other professionals, or the janitor, or whoever else that works here, everyone is entitled to the human dignity. I don't care what their job is. And I really truly mean that. If you deny others their dignity, there's going to come a point where somewhere along the line, what could have been maybe settled with a little in the corner, nice little 2-on-2 or 1-on-1 conversation becomes an investigation. And before we know it, there are hearings, there are lawyers, there are all sorts of things you don't want to know about. And then it has to be reported to the Office of Professional Medical Conduct under certain circumstances. Things that get blown out of proportion, that if you simply played nicely in the sandbox with others, it wouldn't happen. I'm not here to tell you don't express your opinion about the new medical records keeping system or what's required for robotics. Of course you should express your opinion. But as a professional, and if you're outvoted, or if medical journals or whatever the standard of care is just goes against whatever it is, learn to accept it and move on, or find another domicile and see if there's more to your liking. There are hospitals up in the Binghamton area where certain physicians, there was a big brouhaha about robotics, not robotics, and certain procedures. One particular person who was rather renowned in the field had to move on. The problem was he didn't move on gracefully. And he made a terrible mess for himself, totally needlessly. And this is a particular particular doctor that's quite skilled in what he or she does. Quite skilled. And there aren't that many people with his or her skills in that area of New York State. But the hospital did what they had to do, especially when that hospital was taken over by a billion-dollar monster from out of state. They couldn't care less about this particular decision. They did what was good for them. No. Okay. Malpractice claims. Well, now, how does diagnosis errors could be, if you make an error in diagnosis, is that automatically malpractice? You're shaking your head, no, you're shaking your head, and you'd be correct. The standard of care is, did you make a reasonable diagnosis for the information you had at the time you made that diagnosis? None of us, we're not God. We're not perfect. Now, certain things might seem obvious, but there's very often more to the story when you get a particular test back. Not every person with a headache requires a brain scan, nor will you be reimbursed for a brain scan every time someone comes with a headache. You can't give every test to every patient. If you try, you'll be calling lawyers like me for other reasons. Overutilization, insurance fraud, office of professional medical conduct, all sorts of goodies. And by the way, sometimes these things get to the criminal arena. I've been involved in that too with physicians, where sometimes when you have an investigation by a governmental agency, if they feel that it crosses over from a civil penalty to this is a bad actor, it could become criminal. And sometimes people working for the federal and state government, they like to put a notch on their gun. And the fact that you have an MD or DO after your name makes you particularly sexy. So you're a target. There's no doubt about it. Medication errors. That's another, hopefully it will be less common now that with electronic medical records, everybody's handwriting becomes less of a factor. I know there were times I couldn't read my own handwriting. So typing is a wonderful thing, and electronic medical records are very good when it comes to that. Failure to monitor and track test results. That's a big one. Well, for that matter, to follow up the test that you suggested. That comes up all the time. The cardiologist or the internist suggests, you know what, you need an echo. Okay, doc, here's the number, call. There's just no follow-up. Did someone from your office call the patient to follow up if the test was taken? Did you get a report from the cardiologist, if you didn't take it yourself, of what the test showed? Does your chart reflect the patient didn't go for the test even though they were called 2 or 3 times? The answer to that is most of the time, no, it doesn't. Most of the time, not all the time. If it does, first of all, it's good medicine. Second of all, it insulates you from the whole thing, from the criminal to the civil penalties to the malpractice to the Department of Health and all this. It insulates you. When people from the OPMC, when the plaintiff's experts, physicians, and they have them, start reviewing your medical records, and they see your records have those things, a letter from or records from the prior treating physician, or at least it says attempted to obtain records that weren't available from the prior treating physician. When your chart is at that level as far as good, they're not going to want to go near you. You're too good for them. We'll go to the next easy, low-lying fruit. Because they'll find 29 charts that doesn't have that information. If your chart had that kind of information routinely, they're not going to want to bother with you. You're too hard to hit. I know it's a pain in the neck. I know it means you're getting home a half hour later every night. But you'll sleep a lot better when you finally get home. I can assure you. Any questions on that? Please.
If there's a situation where there's like a medication error and you was not prescribed by you on the case, it was prescribed by a consultant, and a full disclosure obviously is recommended, and that prescribing doctor will not do a full disclosure. If you are involved in the case,
okay, go ahead. So you already sued, you're saying?
No.
Okay, you're involved in the case, and a consulting doctor you feel gives the wrong recommendation.
Will give a medication error, a documented medication error.
Okay.
But doesn't, won't come in part of the disclosure. But you are the admitting physician, the consultant prescribed it. Do you think it's worthwhile for you though you had no fault and obviously weren't a part of that, should we be involved in those conversations? And
conversations with who? The patient?
patient.
Yes. Are you still the treating the physician on record with this patient? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, but I mean, you didn't
I understand that. But if you're the what do they call it, the primary care provider these days, that's part of your bailiwick. So if you're aware of an error, I would document that factually. No, do not, don't say the document is stupid mistake. I've seen a lot worse than charts. A lot worse than that. With words I won't repeat professional comfort. Just like you wouldn't characterize your patient in chart as being a jerk, and I've seen that in charts too, and a lot worse. But you could describe or characterize what your patient factually did while in the waiting room, including the language that they might have used, and who heard it, that kind of thing. So your chart should be factual whenever possible. So if the doctor prescribed 25 instead of 0.25, you could put down the recommended dosage was 0.25. It appears the patient was prescribed 25. Patient was advised of the error, or the patient was advised of this, and the situation was corrected. We'll leave it at that. You didn't impugn anyone's professional integrity. You didn't call them a name, but you can't ignore that. So it's a question of patient safety, and it's also a question of protecting yourself.
We do need to consider using risk management or leadership within the system to help solve that. There was a case in which one doctor called another doctor, had the phone on speakerphone, and next to the patient and patient's husband, and the doctor on the other end said, well, you know, the patient's husband is a jerk. And so this is on the speakerphone. Don't ever do anything like that, because that turned out to be a big fiasco. Yes.
Please.
Question in terms of recommending, as you said, procedures, either a few months or a few weeks after discharge. For those of us who are hospitals, we don't have outpatient practice. So the recommendations usually indicate in our discharge summary, if there's a pneumonia with perhaps suspicion of something where you wait for the pneumonia to clear, perhaps do another radiographic study routine, in addition to a follow-up exam. Where's the liability there in terms of making sure that patient gets, let's say, a repeat chest, CT of the chest, or chest X-ray in a month's time?
Is the patient's caring physician, follow-up physician made aware of those recommendations?
Exactly. In cases like this, there's a discharge summary and or a call to say, could you make sure that such and such.
To the treating physician.
To the treating physician, that should be sufficient.
That's it.
You can document, and that's it.
Document. Yep.
So you spoke to them.
Document. You spoke and or gave the summary of the recommendations, and then you should be good to go. But all too often, there's nothing in the hospital record about that conversation. That's how you insulate yourself.
Must it always be a conversation? Can it also just be, if you're saying that I'm forwarding the discharge summary to said primary care?
With including recommendations for follow-up care. Absolutely. You protected yourself. That should be fun. What I would do in that occasion, if you couldn't find a physician willing to, then I would give them a copy of the discharge summary and say, please hand this to the next doctor that you see.
And document they did that.
I'd scan a copy of it right into the records and document you did it. And perhaps, and again, I don't want to, the hospital protocol may be different, but I would have people sign something that they got a copy of the discharge records for their next treating physician.
We cannot do it all today. We cannot take out what you do.
Well, then perhaps you could print out the recommendations for follow-up and have the chart or the record document that they were given the recommendations to be handed to their physician when one was obtained. Something to protect your backside. That's really what it comes down to. And also, when the patient decides hopefully to go to a clinic somewhere, that it gives the physician a heads up as far as what occurred prior to. So you're really helping the patient's care by doing that. All right? In that vein, we're talking about what happens on the telephone with the speaker. Social media. Now, we had a physician, somewhere upstate, but it could be anywhere, who texted a message about a patient's parentage or alleged parentage, or someone wasn't the parent that they thought wasn't the father, and it came through, and he hit send. I shouldn't even say he. That person hit send, and unfortunately, the wrong person got the text. The mother of that particular patient. Needless to say, we were off to the races at the Department of Health. Now, that particular physician, we were able to he didn't have any problems in the end. But, man, he had a lot of problems until we got to that he didn't have to have. Please stay off of all social media, and that includes emails, when it comes to talking about your patients. If you want to have some kind of email portal, which is encrypted, and it's safe, and it has the passwords and things between you and your patients, so perhaps they can access their medical records or they can access a test result, that's fine. But if you want to chat about someone's social life, do you know that? No, you can't do that. Patients have their privacy. You can't do that. Even if you live in the community with the patient, actually, especially if you live in the community with the patient. You just can't. Would you like your doctor chatting about your personal stuff and the medications you're taking and your intimate histories to total strangers, to you or friends of you? It's no one's business. That's why you go to the doctor. They're expecting privacy. Forget about HIPAA. It's just, again, it's human decency. You wouldn't do that. Okay. You have to make reasonable accommodations for deaf patients, for blind patients. Reasonable accommodations might, look, if you're in a New York City hospital and someone speaks an unusual language, that hospital may very well have a translator for that language. But, it comes to a point, it may not be so easy. If you're in private practice and you have a patient that's deaf, the easiest way would be maybe just write it down on a little blackboard or write it down on a piece of paper and let them write something down on a piece of paper if they have a question. It may take a few extra minutes, but it'll be a lot easier than having to have a full-time American Sign Language interpreter. But that's a judgment call you have to make. If you're in a hospital, they may have someone fluent in ASL all times. Or if they know someone's coming, they can get that person to come. But it's reasonable, not unreasonable accommodations.
How about if patient is a particular language speaking that you are not fluent with, but some other employee in the hospital is fluent with? Can they stay as an interpreter?
Yes, but you need the patient's permission, because that interpreter is going to find out some personal stuff about that patient. And you should put that in your record, that Joe Jones, or whatever the name, came to interpret, patient gave permission, do it in writing if at all humanly possible. Patients put the interpreter's name in there. Because you could, and I'll skip to it right now because we're kind of running out of time anyway. You could give informed consent till the cows jump over the moon. And if the patient is not fluent in English, you didn't do anything. You were talking to yourself. Here's as long as we're on the subject of informed consent. Is a consent form required in New York State before procedures are performed? That'd be a yes or a no, believe it or not. Yes? The answer's no. Public health law dealing with informed consent doesn't talk about anything in writing. It says that there must be informed consent. Informed consent is a process, it's not a piece of paper. It's a process. Explain to the patient the general considerations of whatever their diagnosis is for the situation. It's talking about the alternative type treatments, including no treatments and their repercussions, and the reasonable risks. Not every risk that could possibly ever be. There's not enough time in the day. The reasonable risks. That's the process of informed consent, and trying to make sure the patient understands what you're talking about. Now, it's smart to memorialize the informed consent with a signed consent form. A, it protects you from criminal assault, and B, it's evidence that you perform the process of informed consent. How often do attorneys here at a deposition or in court, the doctor shoved a piece of paper under my face right before they put the anesthesia mask over me and said, sign here, or a nurse or an MA or whatever. It happens too often. Informed consent is a process which should be documented. And truth is, it should be documented long before a procedure is performed. It should be documented from the first time that it's a possibility. So in my own particular office, if a patient came in with a heel spur, somewhere in my chart, in the very first form should be that I explained to the patient what this heel spur was, I went over the x-ray with the patient, went over the possible treatment regimens with the patient, which, by the way, for a heel spur, generally the first line of defense is not removing the spur, it's various other things. But that should be in there from day one. You put in your own diagnosis. The fact if it ever proceeds to actually be an invasive procedure, that's fine. But there might be 2, 3, 4, 5 references in my charts over a period of months or years as to the process of informed consent. The consent form is just a piece of paper, one shot. It's actually 2 different things, all right? But that piece of paper, while it's not required, is required by almost every hospital in the country and virtually every surgery center in the country, and you'd be foolish not to get that piece of paper. It's just not required by law. And every once in a while, the piece of paper is lost, or was not scanned in, and frankly, that's the defense in New York State. That the chart in other areas documents the informed consent process, and the paper itself is not required. Hopefully, you have a jury sophisticated enough to know the difference, and lawyers that know how to explain that. Where are we? Now, if they're asking for your records, that's usually not a good thing. If a lawyer's asking for your records, you have to give it in New York State. But you are allowed to charge 75 cents a page. All right? So you don't, and you can wait to get the check before you give the records. If someone is indigent, they're still entitled to the records, even if you don't get paid. Whatever you do, and I have a slide here somewhere, here. Your analysis is not given to a lawyer, and somehow that shows up. How would that show up? If you didn't give it to the lawyer when he or she asked for records, how would that show up at trial? Any thoughts? Patient might have got a copy of their own record at a prior date. You forgot about it. An insurance company asked for a copy of their records as part of what they're allowed to do. Someone at the front desk gave someone a copy of something or other that you weren't even aware of, and that happens more frequently than you know. Let's see others. Insurance companies. You forget that you gave a copy out somewhere in prior times. It happens. It happens. Or by mistake, something is sent that you didn't think was sent. So here's the takeaway here. Don't do that. Also, changing of records, once you get sued, I'm going to add this, I'm going to add that. Well, with electronic medical records, there is a log. So you can do the addendum thing, and that's fine. Of course, if you addend a note 3 years later and say addended, it's pretty obvious what you're doing. It's not going to have much credibility. An addendum 24 hours or a week later, that's another thing that has much more credibility. But if it's an addendum after you've already been hit with a lawsuit, there's no credibility there. The plaintiff's lawyers will request the log so they can see any changes when it was last modified in their records. So you're not going to fool anybody with an EMR. And a lot of lawyers, not all, are sophisticated enough, even with handwritten records, to know when there's a change. Many times when doctors make a change, because they're not really, it's not what they normally do, they will write down the date that they needed, but they'll write down this year, not the date from 3 years ago. That's one of the easiest ways that the doctors get tripped up time and time again. It could be a different ink. They could date your inks if they have an original record. Don't do it, because you could have a totally defensible case or a case that has very little damages. And once you change the record, and they know you changed the record, man, it's just a question of how much you're going to be paying out, not a question of if you're going to be paying out. And if it gets bumped, and it will, to the Department of Health, they take a very dim view of that. That's an easy way to get suspended or even lose your license for a long period of time. So like the Watergate thing, it's the cover-up, not the crime. Stay away from that. And also, applications, keep them accurate. Don't think that they're not going to know you had a problem. All right. Periodically, do an internal audit. If you're in a group with other doctors, look at each other's charts from time to time. Make sure they're of sufficient quality. And improve going on. We all want to improve. We'll kind of handle this already, too. Let's see. And again, this is all nice, but it's talking to the patient and making the patient feel important. That's the other thing. One last thing is the press. Every once in a while, we will treat it or had a client. I had several famous patients over the years, and someone sticks a mic in front of your face, or a reporter wants to get a quote or something. Don't do it. Or if you're sued or there's an investigation, what do you have to say to yourself? No comment. The mat is a wonderful 2 words. You won't say the wrong thing. Now, I deal with that in my attorney hat these days, too. We won a very high-profile criminal case in upstate New York where a doctor was charged with Medicare fraud. They want him to put away for 13 years. We got a not guilty verdict, which happens less than 5% of the time in these cases. There were reporters from Syracuse, Utica, you name it, with mics and cameras and notebooks. And as much as I'd love to gloat and really stick it to the federal prosecutor, no comment. Because you have to deal with these people in the future. You don't want to make enemies when you don't have to. And no comment, you didn't dig a hole for yourself. Because if you say the wrong thing, they'll play that tape at the trial. Don't do it. As physicians, you're educated. You like to explain, resist the temptation. I can talk my way out of it. I don't need a lawyer. I don't need it. It's a different arena. Trust me on this one. You don't have to trust me. Just speak to your colleagues if they've ever been there. It's a different arena. Your words will be twisted. They'll cut off the last half of your sentence or the first half of your sentence, and you'll wind up saying what you didn't say. And you'll need to start explaining why you said what you said. No need. You don't have to explain, no comment. There's just nothing to explain. Most of what I said today, if not all of it, is common sense. If you have any questions, I'll take more questions. I'll be happy to stay for a few minutes. But you have my phone number and call me. The media's not running.
You are saying that if lawyer comes and in deposition, it's better to stay shut than talk about the patient here?
We're talking about who?
Like if somebody sue you and if they call you for deposition, it's basically you.
Oh, no, you have to testify truthfully to that position. I'm talking about the press.
Oh, so
the press, you're not under oath to say anything. At a deposition, that's a whole different ballgame. They have to be prepared and prepped by your attorney. That's a whole process in and of itself. You should answer truthfully, but only the question you're asked, not 25 questions you weren't asked. Yes or no, do it. That deposition, yes or no, wonderful answer. Because the more you don't do that 29 more, they're going to give them the information. Did I say that help? Sure. All right. It's a pleasure to be here again. To my knowledge, you have anything about Richard?
I know a little bit about Kobak's history. Mike Shopman, who when I was president of the County Medical Society and I'm state legislative chair for the Medical Society, they are the best people. So many of our colleagues from actually this area have gone to them. They get the best advice. Not that I'm getting any commission, but they're always there and very, very, very helpful.
My pleasure. Thank you. My pleasure. If you have any questions, call me at the office.
Change your profession.
Oh, okay. I'll tell you a story. I was having a particularly aggravating day with patients, and a lawyer had told me, and he was giving me a lecture that law school was just as hard as medical school. Chemistry, prep cycle. I said, yeah, we'll take the LSAT. Let's see how you do. So I did well. Long story short, like 7 years later, I had another aggravating day. Mother was guessing by a law school in Long Island, and I walked in, and I guess they called it midlife crisis, and they offered me a scholarship, and I went at night for 4 years, and I graduated, valedictorian. But I can't tell you, medical school's going on.
medical supervision.
Oh, sure. Physiology is a lot harder than contract.
You did part-time of the
I did part-time at night. So I worked until 2 days before.
that night?
You go 4 days at night, 1 night at night. It's generally from 5 o'clock at night to 10 o'clock at night. Then come home, wake up at the same time, go to work for the whole day, and go to law school all day. In between patients, sometimes I'm studying or whatever. Those days we spend patients.
It's still available.
Law school at night, yeah. A lot of law schools have evening classes. You have to take the same bar exam and pass it. That's the same one. But it's 4 years at night. No such option for medical.
But you know, as a physician, we are working. We can
Absolutely.